Community, huh? Collaboration, right? Well, we meant that. Welcome to another video by Debate Boutique. We are so excited. I am so excited to be piloting Debunk the Arguments as part of our DB Connect subscription service. Now, the month of October, we are going to be offering this for free, but starting November 1st, only folks who are subscribed to the DB Connect subscription, which you'll be able to find a link to the website for that in the description box below, November 1st. Now, a little bit about it. This is not an attack towards schools, but if you choose to view this as violence, well, respectfully. The point is collaboration, community, and engagement. There are just students who do not have access to good strategy making versus these top apps and are left to their own devices to just simply understand, what is this affirmative saying? What is this negative argument doing? These questions to even get to the question of strategy and how to best create a clash-based debate. We love clash so much, right, y'all? Those things we kind of assume and take for granted. And so we believe this is an equalizing project to provide resources, to provide insight and strategy from folks with burning desires to deconstruct affirmative and negative arguments. For right now, it's held to the high school circuit. We will expand out into college once we get a good flow of logistics here for high school. But this is meant to be a community collaboration, which means that even if you are not a consultant as part of Debate Boutique, you can email cwalrath@debateboutique.com, which will also be in the description box. She is the chief executive of operations, so she's in charge of all logistics in terms of what the staff do once they are part of Debate Boutique, or if someone is doing some work for Debate Boutique. You will email her saying that you are interested in debunking an argument on the high school circuit. You will say which team and which argument, and you will give a slight proposal. From that, she will review it, and she will send an email with 100% payment transparency. Payment transparency is the following: that for a 15 to 20 minute video, that is $50, right? We're not asking you to cut a file. We're not asking you to deep dive and provide every single resource for students to put together the strategy. It is deconstructing, annotating an aff or neg argument strategy that you produce. If there are articles, which there should be, that will be listed as one of the requirements for the service. You will send that to us. If you cannot find the access to the article, we will get access to the article and we will send it out to the folks who are subscribed to the DB subscription. And yeah, all of the other logistics will be stated in the email that she responds to you once she has gotten an idea for what aff, what negative you're trying to debunk. And I really think that that's self-explanatory. DB Connect subscribers get to pick the argument. So we will ask or poll like we did on Instagram. If you're not following Debate on Instagram, you should, because we polled folks and we asked, what do y'all think the team that we're creating with the first ever Debunk the Video argument was produced for? We said North Broward or Berkeley Prep. Now, unanimously, the answer was Berkeley Prep, which makes sense because they've done some great work to be ranked top team in the country, which Berkeley Prep, you're the next aff or neg that we are going to do a Debunk the Argument for, which is great, right? It just means that y'all are putting pressure on the circuit, and we want to help folks be able to elevate to that and to provide some pressure back to y'all. But we allow for the subscribers to pick what is the next argument that y'all want to be debunked. What are the 2 arguments for the month? It's $9.99, y'all, because I believe in paying people. I would love for everything to be free, but that's just not the reality. People are putting in work, and we are making sure to compensate people for the labor, intellectual labor that they are putting in to creating and cultivating the best academic community that we can as possible. We are committed to engagement, elevating the community, allowing for a fair enterprise, as fair as we at least can, right? And so if you're interested in being a part of this November 1st, make sure to visit the information on the website, Subscribe so that November 1st, all of November, all of December, and the rest of the school year, you have access to these wonderful and spicy, violence respectfully debunk videos that are going to shake the community up a little bit. And without further ado, Caitlin, as I've introduced her as the Chief Executive of Operations, is doing the first debunk video with North Broward GG's affirmative. I hope that y'all enjoy this and give us some commentary. We want some juicy feedback for what you all are thinking, and we are so excited to add this to another service that Debate Boutique provides. Y'all have a great rest of your day or night whenever you're watching this, and to forever shaking things up. Bye.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Debunk the Argument. My name is Caitlin Walrath. I'm the Chief Executive of Operations here at Debate Boutique, and I'm so excited to do this video with you all today. And so today, in the Debunk the Argument video, we're going to highlight the strengths and weaknesses of different affirmatives and successful affirmatives. And particularly in this week, we'll be looking at the aff that just recently won Green Hill from North Broward GG, the Water Cyber Infrastructure aff. And so how this will go is I'll discuss a few reasons why I think the aff is good, a few reasons why I think that the aff might struggle, and highlight a couple negative strategies there. Then we're going to go in depth on one big negative strategy, and then I'm just going to kind of wrap up thoughts together and just kind of go over that. So without further ado, let's begin. So let's first talk about this aff and kind of why I think it's good. And the first place I want to go to is kind of the question of the plan and solvency, because I think that that's really, there we go. This is where this aff really shines. And I think there are two main reasons why this aff is strategic. One is that it shifts the question of what water resources are and forces a reconceptualization of the debate around that. So typically, when we think of water resources within our brain, we think of environmental and biological sites, but this aff questions the management of those things and locates how it impacts resources, and the protection engages it in with how those resources are managed and how we access them, because that's really how they become resources in the first place, because they're utilized. And so what this does is it forces you to shift a lot of your blocks in terms of what links you want to frame to develop on arguments, things like politics, because you can't just go for climate modeling, or environmental politics are, toxic, because you have to defend the question of why management of those things are necessarily bad, or how those things change the concept of those. B is that you want to explain how things like federal follow-on or modeling arguments would work differently. So you can't just be environmental politics work because, the states have been taking the lead versus the federal government, or if you want to do executive Congress plans, this aff doesn't really specify an actor, but if you want to attempt to go for that, how internal modeling for those things would work, because of questions of security disclosures and cybersecurity are different than just pure environmental management. So I think it shifts a lot of those questions and how you'll deploy those solvency advocates, what cards you'll want on deck, etc. And then the last part is C. It's going to change how you're going to want to explain the terrain of K-links and how they interact with the affs mechanism. So you're going to have to interact with the questions of things like the cyberspace, whether or not terrorist actors exist and can attack the aff. Why would they target water infrastructure resources? All those good questions. And so that's going to change a lot of how you decide how the links will interact with the affs mechanism and kind of get to the core of the debate. The second main reason why I think this aff is good is I think it has a great federal key warrant because of that shift I mentioned above. Because it's a question of how water is managed and how those security infrastructures are created, the aff naturally requires an actor that has a large scope and impact those resources in a uniform fashion / has less contingent factors or, parties arguing. Also, I'm sorry if you heard meowing, my cats are playing in the background. And so additionally, the federal government's going to be key because things like cybersecurity and the natural management of those things will require higher security disclosures that may not be afforded to the state because of, top secret things like not wanting our understanding of our operations get leaked, etc., as well as going to need a bunch more funding because the aff attempts to improve this infrastructure, not only in communication, but just in terms of resiliency and all that stuff. And that can be tricky for certain counterplan advocates as well as dissent links to deal with, just in terms of how the aff actually gets implemented and how you can kind of capture all that solvency. And so those are kind of the two main reasons to think that the aff is good. There's a bunch more, obviously, because it's a successful aff, but those are the ones I wanted to highlight. So now I'm going to shift into the reasons why I think that the aff might struggle, and like some places where I think you can highlight general weaknesses for neg strategy to like complement kind of anything you go for. Number one is like, I think this aff lacks in having terminal impacts that don't struggle to deal with a lot of simple impact defense pushes. So relying solely on things like cyber attacks, grid failure, and terror impacts can be difficult both in terms of proving brinks for those terminal impacts, like, how many cyber attacks do we have to have? The grid went down from things like the blackouts in Texas, as well as, like squirrels chewing on lines. What is the brink for it actually collapsing globally, or not globally, nationally, and like actually preventing us from having access to infrastructure and actually reaching a retaliatory state? Second, it struggles in questions of why would water infrastructure out of all of the critical infrastructure be targeted in the first place? Why is that considered the highlight of critical infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera? And I think the aff will have a lot of cards on these questions, but I think it's somewhere where you can make a bunch of pushes really quick and force the aff to sink a lot of time to actually build them up in order to maintain them, or force them to read a bunch of add-ons and shift the debate completely. So it could, force the debate to stay on its toes and, allow you a lot more flexibility in how it evolves. The second reason that I think that the aff might struggle is that I think that this aff is pretty susceptible to advantage counterplans, not only because of the, kind of narrow is not the right word, but fairly narrow range of impacts kind of in how they have to deal with impact defense. I also think they take a lot of liberties by using broad terms like think critical infrastructure or laundry list type sentences that include phrases like water resources or water infrastructure to prove why the aff is a necessary internal link. But I think that they lack an overwhelming card that water infrastructure and improving of those critical infrastructure is necessary to deter all things like terror or deter all potential sources of conflict or attacks or vulnerabilities within grids, et cetera. And so I think a well thought out advantage counterplan could force them to sink a lot of time into it, read a bunch of cards, and, kind of keep people on their feet and force some critical thinking. So I think that would be a good place to push. All right. Now that I've talked about a couple reasons why the aff might struggle and highlighted some general neg pushes, the one big neg strategy that I would like to highlight against this team, and let me scroll to it, is T water resources. I'm actually really shocked I haven't seen more docs with people actually going for this against this aff. I've seen a lot of T protection and T water resources been read in a couple of 1 and Cs, but not extended. So I think it would be really important to talk through it and kind of go through it. And while they seem to be seasoned in the T-bait after debating T protection a lot, and yes, they do read a lot of evidence, make a lot of smart arguments like plain text in a vacuum, all that stuff, I think a well-prepared 2N could cause a lot of trouble for this aff. So let's start by looking through first, actually, the plan text and then the 2AC. So the plan text notes that what the plan does is it increases critical infrastructure protection of surface water storage and groundwater reserves in the United States. And so what this entails is protection of the facilities where we gain access to water sources for things like potable use, as well as there are certain industrial access ports for these things, but typically it's mostly for potable use and how you distribute for things like taking a bath or drinking or just drinking water in general, cooking, etc. And so why I think T water resources here is important is the quote unquote reserves that they increase protection over surface water storage and groundwater reserves are not water resources in the sense that most negative evidence will define it in the sense of, which is like the literal, like physical resources of water, such as rivers or brackish waters, etc. What this is referring to are the storage facilities that we create that centralizes water or centralizes an access point to those water resources, then can distribute those things. So the aff increases protection over the facilities that we have created to access water resources, not the like water resources as they exist out in nature itself. And why I think this is important is I think it changes a lot of how we end up reading a lot of their 2AC evidence in the context of water resources. So to go through those now, the first piece of evidence that they read, the USGS piece of evidence, defines surface water storage as water resources. If you do some more research on what this is talking about, when it's talking about surface water resources and groundwater reserves in these senses, they're talking about where surface water is stored currently, so like lakes, rivers, etc., and groundwater reserves that are already in the grounds but that are not always being actively used by humans. They're just the ones that exist out in nature and kind of how we protect them from pollutions and stuff. And certainly there are monitoring programs for all of these things outside of just the physical facilities that I kind of talked about, what I think that the app primarily impact in general. Like there's like sensors and sonar and stuff that we kind of have to keep up. But that is what the AF impacts are, the facilities through which we understand where water resources are and how we access them rather than the resources themselves. They improve that infrastructure for accessing them. So I think there's a smart affects T argument to be made here that when all your cards are talking about surface water, groundwater reserves, when they're talking about them in the context of not only protection, but the actual resources themselves, they're talking about when you actually apply to the physical resources, not the infrastructure that protects them or ensures access to them. The second card, the USGS card, kind of gets what I'm talking about, potable water supply. This is the water that we have demarcated as being consumable or utilizable by humans, but does not necessarily refer to the transformation process of when we actually have those facilities to actually make it potable in terms of like distribution. So I think, again, you can make an argument that the app is about facilities, not necessarily directly impacting this potable supply. Now, this is where it gets interesting is when we start talking about infrastructure, this USGPO argument. I think that this is another place where you kind of have to talk about how while these cards are mentioning water resources in passing, they're talking about them in relationship to we have to access water resources as a critical part of U.S. security, as well as just like functioning as any society, because you have to have access to resources. And when it's talking about them as being the backbone and like needing infrastructure to protect them, we need that infrastructure in order to access the water resources. But protection of the resources themselves is not necessarily dependent on whether or not we have the infrastructure to access them. It's dependent on whether those resources, are contaminated or not, which is a different question. So I think an interpretation that focuses on the question of protection of water resources requiring impacting directly water resources that are impacted by pollutants or something like that could be a really deadly interpretation. I want to talk about their T protection cards really quick because I think you kind of have to make a T protection and water resources argument in order to go for the water resources part. But I think that the T protection cards kind of suffer from a similar issue. So when they're talking about how protection of them includes physical and digital security of them, and they're citing all of these different branches of government that use these terms in passing, Congress, executive agency, industries, etc. What they're talking about are how we protect our access to those things. And if you read through it, like, let me go through them each. So like this first one, the USGS card, when it's talking about critical infrastructure program, it's linking the security of said water to them, but not necessarily water as a resource to that critical infrastructure, because it says for water and other resources. Water is just simply one resource that is managed and facilitated through improvements of critical infrastructure. The Congress piece of evidence, it says protection of water resources and facilities. When it's talking about facilities, that's when it's talking about the cybersecurity threats, and then physical and chemical ones can also happen to facilities, but typically those refer to the actual physical water resources. Executive agency, it's talking about the same thing. It's talking about drinking water and wastewater utilities in general. Industry cards, same thing, blah, blah, blah. It's talking about ports. I'm not going to go through all of these and stuff. But I very much encourage you all to kind of look into this yourself and consider going for T against this app, because I think it's really good. And North Broward, I'm looking forward to seeing your updated T blocks when people actually start going for these arguments for it, because I think you all have some pretty good ones and reading a lot of good cards that are tricky to deal with. So yeah, with all that being said, though, That is the end of this episode of Debunk the Argument. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, leave them below in the comments. We'll be sure to respond to you. And let us know what argument you want us to respond to next time. It doesn't always have to be an aff. It could be any neg argument, anything that you want us to go through, break down, and think about how do we answer these things. And with that being said, once again, I'm Caitlin Walrath with the Debate Boutique Network, and it's been nice talking to you.